Talking about missing characters, number 6 on this list is a personal preference. I miss the Rogue Squadron stories. I know there's probably going to be something like this in the future, but the story, it seems almost impossible because Wedge Antilles and Rogue Squadron continued for such a long time, and Poe Dameron kind of is the Wedge stand-in here, it seems like. But the way they handled the building up of these squadrons, it was such a different take on Star Wars to see how someone at a squadron level, how you build into like this family unit. It felt so intimate while at the same time being such a different take militarily. It wasn't about the Jedi and the Force other than Corran Horn. It was just more about operating as a unit and doing things, not being super powered. That's what I miss so much. They had to be smarter, and they had to do ground missions, and they flew X-wings like badasses, and now it's like all been condensed into Poe Dameron. Like, you remember when during the attack on the Death Star, the members of Red Squadron at the time got shot down, and you feel when you read the comics or read the books or play the games, you feel this different level of the war. You feel that personal, deeper story that every person in like the military is going through. And I know that's cheating because that's all expanded universe. That's not even tied to the original movies, but I don't want it's almost like the whole thing of stepping into like having the Skywalkers and Solo family. You get so over like the Rogue Squadron and Wraith Squadron series is 10 books long. And you get into these characters and this mindset so much more than I can imagine doing for a long time in the new stuff. I miss that. I miss that sense of here's a down-to-earth story. I know Rebels kind of has that, but Rebels is about Jedi and the top-end heroes. Like, Rogue Squadron are heroes, but they don't have some crazy advantage. They're like the rogues, except for Chirrut, but you know. But like they're like the crew of Rogue One in the movie. That's probably part of the reason I love Rogue One so much, is because it felt like such a more down to earth story. I just miss that kind of thing, and for me, Rogue represents that down to earthness. It feels like they tried to do that by keeping Poe in the story so much, but when you do so many ridiculous things like the casino planet in Force Awakens in Last Jedi, or when Finn breaks away from the Empire, it all feels very singular and very high level, even though it's not. Rogue Squad, like the stories of the rogues, just feel like here's a couple of people who are lauded as heroes, but it's not. It's to them, it's just people they're with, and it being a hero is kind of an accident almost. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm trying to. There's a lot of deep feelings to try to dig out in one list, but anyway, I just miss those stories, and those will forever be one of my absolute favorite series, is the Rogue Squadron stories, because of that sense of camaraderie and purpose almost. Like the top level heroes are always questioning, what do we do, whereas rogues are just, here's our objective, we will do it, we will execute it as best as we can, and that clarity is missed a lot at this point in Star Wars movies, I feel. Again, this number 7 on the list is kind of a cheat, because it's not like this isn't touched on in the new movies at all. It's certainly a factor, but I miss the technology of the old stories. And I know that that's cheating because it is basically the same, but the way it just feels like things have changed in ways I wouldn't have changed them, and haven't changed in other ways, or are kind of just being ignored. Again, it's funny to think that the prequels got some things right that these movies did not, in my mind, but things like Poe Dameron at the beginning of Last Jedi taking out all of the cannons on the dreadnought. Like, I remember the biggest point for this in my head is all I could think in Force Awakens and Last Jedi. In the technical guides for the old Star Destroyers, and they were said to have 60 turbo lasers and 60 ion cannons. Now, obviously, that can't really happen. That's probably an exaggeration, but we saw in like the prequels what happens when ships with tons of guns on them just unload on each other, or in the games when you just see like even though in things like Forces of Corruption there aren't that many turbo lasers. That's more of a limitation of the game in my mind. But when you have a dreadnought, a fleet killer with like 10 turbo lasers on top that aren't shielded, that's the other thing. Where are shields? The only time we see shields is during the insanely long chase scene, but they're also getting shot at by like 2 turbo lasers that can shoot, but they lose effectiveness. I mean, that is how turbo lasers work, but it just feels like such a cheat to have this chase. And then you have like the hyperspace tracking, which, I mean, in Star Wars before, they were always able to calculate a trajectory, but you could drop out of how can you tell when someone drops out of hyperspace? I don't know. Things like, as silly as it is considering Starkiller Base, but Starkiller Base is just a lamer galaxy gun, or the World Devastators, or the going into how, kind of touching on the Jedi from before, how lightsabers work, the fact that there was never a exhaust on a lightsaber before because no one built one as terribly as Kylo Ren did. It feels like the technology is being simplified again. And it feels wrong to like lose all of this. Like, they're still flying X-Wings. That's fine. But in the books, they started introducing other things. Like, they had the TIE Fighter and the TIE Interceptor, but then they had like the TIE Raptor or TIE Bombers, and then the TIE Defender, which was so cool. And the X-Wing, E-Wing, B-Wing, A-Wing, Y-Wing, like, and then you think about like all the this is again cheating, but like the New Republic ships that they actually built. It wasn't just Mon Calamari cruisers and Nebulon B frigates, which it is again in Last Jedi, or the insane giant flying wing of Snoke. Like, that's a cool design, but why not just use the Executor again? If you're going to use everything else, or just use a Mon Calamari ship, why not do that? It just feels like the technology isn't being explored. There's just different designs of droids, whereas they talk about how blasters work in the old ones and how, I don't know. It maybe a lot of this feeling of technology is coming from reading those old technical guides where there were so many cool things that you just had to read those guides to learn. But I don't see any of that like being thought about in the new things, if you can understand what I'm talking about. This is probably my weakest point, but I miss this sense of large, like a galaxy of technology. Like the Kaminoans, as silly as they are, that's a cool technology. Cloning. There's nothing interesting like that. At least is a concept that was explored in the prequels. What is there new? Starkiller Base, or a lightsaber with with some exhaust ports, or a crossguard if you want to claim that's what it is. Like, is that it? Is Starkiller Base just building the Death Star gun into a planet the thing? And then even I always remember this. I remember in the books when during the Legacy of the Force, when Jason is about to attack Kashyyyk, and there's a standoff, and his ship has advanced longer range turbo lasers, and he pulls back and starts bombarding the surface of Kashyyyk, and then Luke disables them. That's a cool new thing that they mention. Hey, we advanced our turbo laser technology. We didn't really have time to do this during our war with the Empire because we were the rebellion. But now that we're focusing on having a very efficient, smaller military, we're trying to improve our tech. And he has a line where this is not the days of when he's talking to Ben Skywalker. Your father blew up the Death Star with a single exhaust port. There is no free kill spot on anything. And then we come to Force Awakens and Last Jedi, and what happens? Boom, one shot. Boom, one shot. Like, he made a good point. They learned to check for these kind of things. The Death Star was the single greatest engineering failure of Star Wars. Like, you could say that in Episode 6 they do that, but not really. If you shoot anything in the reactor, it'll blow up. But you shouldn't be able to get to that. Like, they had to fly through the Death Star. If there's layers of armor and structures in the way that would have been completed, they couldn't really have done that. I'm going to go to the next point. I miss a lot of the cool tech. I'll just say that. Seeing as how these points are all kind of tumbling on top of each other, this kind of ties in with the whole Luke thing. And I guess I'll talk about this from The Last Jedi for a minute. My single greatest disappointment of The Last Jedi was how Luke was handled. I can understand why they took him in the direction they did, but I will never agree with it, because Luke Skywalker was, the way I put it in the podcast review was, Luke Skywalker was the hero who I never realized had become my hero. And one of his greatest accomplishments was reforming the Jedi Academy. And even with his failures, Gantoris, Kip Duran, who turned out to not be a failure later on, what is his name? Dorsk 181 or something? 188? I forget what his full designator is. And Barris. No, not Barris. The arrogant kid. I can't remember off the top of my head. And that's how I'm trying to do this, because this is supposed to be a very honest list. I'm not scripting this or anything. I miss the stories and hope that came from the Jedi Academy. I miss the success of the Jedi Academy. And this is tied directly to Luke's character, but the fact that Luke didn't even try right away to open this academy. And I guess the idea in Last Jedi is that he didn't, because he looks older. Obviously, he has the beard and everything. But when he formed the academy, even when I remember the scene, because I reread Last Jedi within the last few months, or iJedi, where Corran talks to him about this. And he's like, dude, you had a few failures, but that's like what any teacher does. It just hits harder because we can use the Force. But you have a lot of really successful Jedi, and he builds this new council and new Jedi Order from himself. It's amazing that he builds this, and they even become Jedi in their own right when he's taken out by Exar Kun. It's wild watching this. It's literally watching the birth of a new Jedi Order. It's so awesome. And then for The Last Jedi to just be about how that's a failure and how the Jedi suck, and there's no attempt by Luke to kind of change things. He just did it and failed, and that was it. And it's so sad compared to, even in the prequels, when you saw what the academy, what the temple on Coruscant was like when Yoda was teaching younglings, or going back to KOTOR again, or the Jedi Academy game when you're in one of the later classes and you're Jaden and you get to be there when the first few successful students teach you how to be Jedi. And it's so different from what you saw during the prequels, where there were these structured classes, and in the books how Luke kind of lets them do their own thing but Tion, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She studies a holocron and learns a lot and teaches them the history to bring them together as Jedi. But they're clearly, this is so uncharted to build this organization from nothing. It's such an awesome journey, and to know that in the movies that never comes to fruition because Luke contemplated killing his own nephew. I'm not going to get into that moment, but it's so fantastic to read the books and see this thing come to light, and I just miss this intimate sense from the Jedi. Like, even when in The Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, the Order is rebuilding after the war where they lost like Anakin Solo, believed to be the next successor to Luke. He was so awesome. And then after the whole thing with Jason, and then the Galactic Alliance with Dala, and this Order retreats in on itself, but you still know some of the names who've just been there forever. Cam Solazar, who's been there forever. Corran, who went off and did his own thing and came back. Kip, who literally fell to the dark side and then crushed himself into a pod to escape destroying the superweapon that he committed genocide with. It's so... There's so many characters that matter, and it feels like that's all gone. Speaking of the Jedi, for number 9 on this list, this relates directly to a single scene in The Last Jedi. Early on in The Last Jedi, there is a scene, is definitely infamous by now for, I guess you could call it the Mary Poppins or Space Angel scene, is things that I've called and heard it referred to as, when Kylo Ren attacks the bridge of the Calamari cruiser, and Leia is blasted into space, and somehow she survives and pulls herself back to the ship and then falls into a coma. And then later on in the movie, Luke projects his own image across the galaxy for minutes, and then is done. And then that kills him. That does kill him, to be sure. But I miss feeling like the Force had limits. It's funny because I said it's cool for Rogue Squadron to not have superpowers. The Jedi basically do have superpowers, but there are limits to them. Now, you could call that's limits of the writers, even though there was 100 books on it. But the Jedi couldn't survive in outer space. The closest Luke came was when they would put themselves in healing trances that they had to be awoken from, where they would basically go into a hibernation, or not being able to the Jedi using the temples of Yavin 4 pushed Star Destroyers away at the cost of burning out an entire Jedi. Now, is that more or less impressive than Luke projecting his image across thousands of light years for minutes at a time and fooling thousands of people? You can debate that. But especially the Mary Poppins thing, but partially also Luke's projection, it totally makes it feel like the Force is so wildly inconsistent. Darth Vader strangled a guy across lightsabers when he had direct contact and did it for a few seconds and knew the guy. Luke is just projecting an image. Leia is pulling herself through the vacuum of space. I don't care if you know the Force. How do you stop? Are you telling me a Jedi like Leia, who probably had some kind of training from Luke, but clearly not enough to just use the Force on the regular? Are you telling me Luke could have survived being blown out into space, or that Vader could have? Because then, how does Anakin burn near the... why can't Anakin just stop himself from burning on Mustafar? How does he spontaneously catch fire if he has such control over himself, or can make a Force bubble to survive space that you can't survive heat? Or... plenty of other things, like the Emperor couldn't survive being thrown down a tube because he wasn't strong enough in the Force. It's such a ridiculous power gap compared to what we've seen even in the prequels, that I don't know. I love, as with loving Rogue Squadron, I love the Jedi book where Corran Horn, first person, it's basically like Jedi Batman, as is the best way to put it, which is awesome. But he has a limitation, except for special circumstances. Basically, when he gets shot or tried to get blown up, he can't really use telekinesis. So he's a Jedi who can't really influence things at a distance, but he can create illusions. He could never attempt Luke's force projection across light years. The closest thing that happened was somehow Jason did like a time warpy thing, but there was also a lot of weird stuff going on there. I don't really get it. But I miss the Force having limits. I miss it, like when Snoke makes a bond between Rey and Kylo. I buy that, but I don't buy their bond just being somehow so strong that they can see each other across light. Like, Mara Jade grew up under the Emperor, and yet she could at best hear some of his commands, never see him. Maybe she caught the image of his death and heard him and had psychic commands from him, but it was not regular, and it certainly came when he exerted effort, not just happened. So, but then, if you want to say Snoke is so powerful he could do that, then he didn't sense the Force being exerted on the lightsaber next to him. Seriously? That's so inconsistent. At least the books felt like they were consistently on the lower end of the Force power level because they wanted the Force to not be this omnipotent thing. It shouldn't be, and it couldn't be, and why is it? For the final entry on this list, I want to sum up what I've touched on in a whole bunch of things. I talked about the Skywalker and Solo families. I talked about Mara Jade. I talked about Rogue Squadron. I talked about the Jedi Academy. I talked about the limits of the Force. Almost all of these things relate to one thing. I miss the heroes of the old expanded universe. I miss the Han Solo who had Chewie at his side. I miss the Chewie who cared about his life debt so much that he sacrificed his own life to save the son of the man he has sworn this life debt to. I miss Han and Leia's connection being more than just a hug. I miss them dealing with Leia becoming at one point the leader of the New Republic, and then their relationship suffering, and they never stopped being together, though. There was never, like, in The Force Awakens, it seemed like they were just separate completely. Like they had just decided to give up. They were together tighter than ever after Anakin and what happened to Jason. They were together through thick and thin, and then Luke took the whole weight of the Jedi. He went to the dark side and was pulled back by Leia and took the whole weight of the Jedi as something that he would work for forever. And he constantly learned and constantly adapted and constantly became a better teacher until the whole existence of the Jedi was truly because of him, not just by circumstance of him being a Force user, but because of Luke never giving up and always struggling to bring this light back into the galaxy. I miss my heroes. I miss the sense that they made mistakes but learned and kept going. The whole new trilogy seems to be about them giving up. Leia in the new trilogy is it's never an insult to Carrie Fisher, but she seems very tired and very given up. Like Leia in the books shouldered running the New Republic after Mon Mothma asked her to. In addition to already having been hugely responsible for its rebuilding, she was a diplomat first. But then on top of that, she mothered 3 kids and did become a Jedi and didn't have an easy time of it. She was a Jedi Knight. And Han trying to do his own thing, learning how to deal with being a general in the New Republic military for a while, and learning to trade off his needs versus his family, and him learning how to really be part of a family because he just had Chewie for so long. It was just him and Chewie against the world, and learning to be in that family. Luke dealing with being the Jedi, Mara and him together, and Ben being part of the picture, and Luke being a dad, but also being literally leader of the Jedi. It feels like so much more, and we could see that so much more instead of just these defeated old shells of themselves in the new trilogy. Luke's been hiding for 20 years and has a spark at the very end, but for me, the fact that it was just a projection kind of steals from it. Leia is just very tired and she's a general, but you never really see her commanding much. They even kind of make a reference to her just having a big pick-me-up speech. And then Han just kind of gave up and went off and did his own thing. He didn't even have the Falcon anymore. The ship that ran the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. It feels like they had the galaxy on their backs, and while you might say that everyone has the chance to fail at being a hero, they did fail, but they recognized that it was more important than themselves, and that's where it seems like they left off at the end of episode 6. Like, they were ready to be these leaders. They were that generation of leaders. And it's very disheartening for them to have all just given up. And you could say, oh, they redeemed themselves a little bit. No, Luke hid for 20 years. He did nothing. Yoda lived as a hermit, but he had tried before that. And then Yoda to come back and just be like, nah, Luke, the Jedi don't matter. Crack, call down some lightning on an empty tree. I miss my heroes. And I know that now that Disney's in charge, we're going to see lots of movies with Rey and Finn and Poe and all them, and they're going to be expanded as heroes, but even situations that didn't seem that incredible touched on, like, even when you tangentially see Leia or Luke in the Rogue Squadron books, you get the sense that they at least have shouldered this responsibility instead of throwing it off, and they all feel like they've given up in their own way in the movies, and it just really sucks to lose those heroes. Anyway, it's kind of a somber list this year, but that's my list of the top 10 things The Last Jedi made me miss from the old expanded universe. I know it's a very rambling title, but it's true. That really is what it encompasses. It's what I have missed ever since seeing the new movies. So, and Rogue One gave me a spark of that, even though it doesn't really coincide with what the story was. I actually am happy with that story. I wish Rogue One had been the movie that they made at the end after making the prequels. But what are you going to do? Anyway, thanks everyone for listening to this. I hope you didn't dislike it too much. Happy birthday to me, I guess, 27. Old man Tim over here with his old man Star Wars expanded universe. But while I might not ever get new stories again, I'm always going to love those old stories. And thankfully, while I can watch new movies and things like that and play new games, that is going to be Star Wars for me forever, I think, is these old stories. And I wouldn't call it myself okay with that, but I can accept that, and I can enjoy what I had, and I'll always critique the new stuff against it, as obviously I am. But anyway, I'm pretty much just rambling at that point. Thank you all so much. Enjoy. Hopefully 28 years, a good year for Star Wars. 28 years. Wow. 2018. hopefully 2018 is a good year for Star Wars. Thank you all so much for listening. My name is Timpedia, and I will catch you guys later.